Hello and welcome to webinar here today. Going to give it a minute to allow people to come on in, but excited to talk through some automations in uncertain economic times. Welcome everyone. Happy Friday. We're going to get started in about 30 seconds or so. I'll give a little bit of time for people to come in and we'll get this webinar kicked off. All right, we're going to get started. Welcome to the Bullhorn Automation webinar, episode 3 in our series here, top automations to utilize in an uncertain economy. I'm Billy Davis. I'll be guiding you through this here today. We do have some time saved at the end for questions and answers. So if you do have any, please use the Q&A function inside the webinar. You can do that at any time, and we'll make sure we get to them. If we don't get to all questions, we'll be sure to follow up, answer those, and disseminate them to everyone who needs them. So first up, a little bit of information about me, if you don't know. So I've been automating and staffing since 2016. I was the first full-time Herefish employee. So I came to Bullhorn about 3.5 years ago. Before that, I was at Herefish, came to Bullhorn in the Herefish acquisition. Before being an employee of Herefish, I was one of their first automation clients in the staffing space. And then actually even before then, I was doing some of my own API automation customizations, doing some of that. So I was automating even before kind of the staffing automation products existed in the space. Over my course of my career in the automation industry, I've done about 300 plus implementations with clients and also worked with 1,000 plus. So I utilize that experience, kind of things that have gone well, to kind of curate thought leadership and content around automation and AI to help others along their own journeys. And then throw in another fun fact here about me. I've watched the US version of The Office at least 50 plus times completely. And I do have a habit, if I see a meme of The Office, to almost instantaneously name the season and episode. So if you want to test me, happy to oblige. But let's get into why you all came here today. So episode 3, we're going to talk through top automations to utilize in an uncertain economy. So the first kind of thing that we're going to talk about is just some high-level focus areas that you can think about, as you're trying to optimize, for improvements, revenue, results, regardless of kind of economic conditions. And then the second half of the content here, we'll get into kind of the how-to and specifically how you can do some of these focus areas with automation and other things in your business. So the first high-level focus here is around efficiency. Now, of course, there's never a bad time to become more efficient. So this is why this works regardless of the economic climate. If you're in a rough market, right, the kind of doing less with more really resonates. And then if things are going great, if you're in a boom market, doing even more with more is always a good idea. So focusing on efficiency is something that will help you regardless of the economic conditions in the market. The next up is around experience. So this is really vital, obviously, to providing a great experience, but then also unlocking things like, improved reputation, whether it's reviews or testimonials, ratings, getting, higher referral rates, getting people coming back and doing business with you again. All of those things center on, providing a great experience. So kind of high level focus, you want to ensure that you're covering the 3 unique audiences of staffing and recruiting, candidate experience, client experience, and then your own internal employee experience. And that last one sometimes is forgotten. So put a little added note there. Don't forget that last one. Make sure that you're providing a good experience for your own internal consultants and recruiters. especially on kind of the learning, training, and development side of things. If you can reduce turnover, upskill your team, right, that will have really positive ripples throughout your whole business. Next up is around adaptability. And this is especially an important concept if you get into kind of tough economic times, where if things are going well, you might not necessarily need to change, but as things change for the worse, you might have to change to adapt to survive. So the first thing that's really important, on the adaptability side of things, is ensuring that you're mapping your process, your life cycles, your systems, your technology, et cetera. And the main reason you want to do that is if whomever is doing those things today for your business gets pulled into another project, gets eliminated, their position gets eliminated, you want to ensure that you have some safety mechanisms in place so that you can either train somebody new who's taking over the project, can kind of seamlessly do so. I've seen this happen too often where you have kind of a single person who's handling automation or technology or operations. And then if that person leaves or gets moved to a different area, it really sets back progress because you have to do the whole kind of relearning aspect. So really important concept to ensure that you're kind of mapping things out, documenting everything you can, so you kind of failure proof yourself in the future. And then, this kind of the potential to explore new markets can certainly happen, especially in kind of uncertain economic times. There's times where things that you've done in the past that have been successful aren't just going to work now. So, you have to kind of keep a pulse on the industry, figure out what's happening. And then there might be occasions where you need to pivot, enter a new market in order to kind of stay afloat. The next high-level focus area is around fundamentals. So kind of ensuring that you're doing and building a great foundation for your business. Again, something that will help you kind of regardless of the economic climate. So, regardless of where things are in the current, state, you want to make sure, for example, that you don't forget about sales or business development optimization if you happen to be in a really candidate, focused market, and vice versa. You don't want to forget candidate experience if you're in kind of a client market. And then obviously, if you've been around in the staffing recruiting industry for a while, you'll know that kind of the economic climates kind of is like a pendulum. So it swings back and forth. So, but if you focus on kind of the fundamental areas, ensuring that you're kind of being efficient, doing those key things from a metric KPI perspective, you can ensure that you're driving good results regardless of where the pendulum happens to be in the current moment. Then lastly here, from a high level focus perspective, is thinking about data-driven decisions. So, and this kind of harkens back to the efficiency side of things, but doing the wrong thing better is more efficient, but it's really ineffective to drive better results. So you want to ensure that you're focusing on the right things. And the best way to do that is to use data, track, measure, report, find those key metrics, KPIs, benchmark where you've been historically, see what you can improve, experiment, iterate, and see how you can incorporate those kind of data-driven results into your decision-making, into your experimentations. And then, data is also kind of the driver and tells you where and when, that you need to pivot into a new market, where is something being really successful that you might want to double down and put more, resources towards. So obviously data has a bunch of really beneficial things if you use it for those actionable insights, and if you use it to kind of drive and steer the decisions you're making as a company. So that's kind of the first section of this here. Looking at kind of a high level focus area of areas that you can optimize to ensure that you're, going to be improving and doing a good spot and staying afloat in uncertain times. So as a recap, you want to ensure you're focusing and improving on efficiency, providing a great experience to candidates, clients, and your own internal employees, ensuring that you're adaptable and that you can change when needed, ensuring that you have the fundamentals mastered. You're building that strong foundation to ensure that you're in a good spot regardless of the market climate, and then using data to make your decisions or to influence your decisions as an important factor, so that you can kind of keep tabs on where you're at and improve in the future. And again, just as a reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A portion. We'll have some time at the end to cover questions you might have. So now getting into kind of the how-to portion. So, I mean, all of those kind of high-level focuses, I'm sure there's lots of nodding and agreement with, but the devil's in the details as far as how can you improve, or how can you kind of bring about improvements in those areas in your business. So the first one up around efficiency, the place I always recommend starting is to audit the time spent by your recruiters, consultants. What are the activities that they're doing in a day-to-day basis, and then figuring out and just getting kind of an awareness, number one, of what those things are, can really help you understand where some bottlenecks are, where some things are that could be improved. And then once you have that information, you want to see what you can replace as far as anything that's kind of low value or repetitive. What are things that are manual? What are things that like some data entry things that you might be able to eliminate? What are things that are like double or triple data entry? All of those things, if you can eliminate, you automatically get more efficient in a really good way. And then by kind of focusing on replacing some of those low value repetitive things, freeing up time by taking those away from your recruiters and consultants, you can then do more high value activities. And then, of course, doing more high value activities is really going to ramp up your efficiency and productivity. And then, lastly, the only way to really know if you're improving, if you're going in a good spot on this, is to track this through KPIs. So obviously you need to have a starting point of where you're at today and figure out, how things are trending, how things are improving. What are your top performers doing as far as kind of key KPIs? So that's a really important concept to ensure that efficiency is going in the right direction. Experience. So how to improve the experience for those three unique audiences. So the first important concept here is you have to measure through feedback, because you'll have no really good idea of what the experience you're providing unless you ask, unless you get kind of qualitative data around it at scale. So this is where NPS surveys can be really helpful. Obviously, this can be deployed for those three audiences: clients, candidates, and your own employees. But getting that feedback, where are things going well? Where are things, opportunities to improve? Kind of what are some gaps? All becomes really important, and it's only unlocked by getting that feedback. Auditing your process, really important to do. I recommend, periodically, and I would even think about this every 6 months, every year, walking yourself through the process. Put yourself in the shoes of a candidate, in the shoes of a client, and just, put yourself through the process and figure out if there's anything that can be improved. Are there any kind of disjointed things? Are there any unnecessary delays? A lot of times it'll give you some really good opportunities to improve things or to find out kind of trouble spots. And of course, if you put yourself in the shoes of your candidates and clients, you'll get a real good idea of some areas that you can improve. Want to eliminate gaps. Like that's the kind of the biggest surefire way to provide a negative experience is, if someone, for example, applies to a job and then never hears from somebody. If a client has a job but then goes X amount of time without getting interested candidate or any communication. So eliminate those gaps of communication goes a long way to ensuring that you're providing a good experience, and just eliminating those negative experience points that can really weigh down someone's perception of the experience that you're providing. And obviously doing that at scale is virtually impossible manually. That's why automation comes in and can do a lot of good things to ensure that you're eliminating all of those kind of areas where somebody could kind of slip out of the top of mind, or kind of get forgotten about. Around availability. So, talked about mapping and documenting your processes. I mean, first and foremost, you need to have some SOPs, establishing those, like, so what are you doing from a system, process, and technology standpoint? You want to make sure you have that documented, you have that in a central spot that can be shared, include it in your training, and kind of your upskilling as well for existing employees, and then make them feel a part, involved, in that process. Kind of goes a really long way to kind of getting that information more disseminated throughout your whole organization. And then it's really important to keep a pulse on the market and kind of trends. So, getting an idea of what are kind of common challenges currently getting faced in not only the kind of the greater staffing and recruiting industry, but then your individual niches that you serve from a recruitment perspective. And then staying up to date there will be really important, especially as you're trying to figure out that decision of is this a market that we can ride through in an uncertain time? Do we have to potentially pivot to another area that's kind of really booming? So those types of things, you got to have kind of a pulse on trends, market, and be able to make those decisions. So around fundamentals, how do you do that? How do you make that foundation? So, starting with high impact, low effort automations is always a really good idea. A lot of those are exactly kind of the fundamentals you should start with. If you didn't catch yesterday's webinar, we walked through a bunch of examples of those high impact, low effort automations. So you can check out kind of the recordings for a bunch of those that are broken out by the entities, candidate, client contact, placement, submissions, jobs. You can find a bunch of things that relatively low effort and yield really high impact value. You want to, ensure you're covering the totality of those 3 unique audiences and life cycles. So to have kind of a firm foundation, a really strong base, you want to make sure that you're covering kind of that total end-to-end life cycle for all 3 audiences. So end-to-end from a candidate perspective, from a new lead kind of concept all the way to a placed, and then obviously it goes back and forth. On the client BD side of things, your business development, lead, prospect, all the way to your current client base, and then your internal employees, all the way from new hires, and then your existing employees, ensuring that you have those things. You're trying to optimize them whenever you can. And then last one here on how to for fundamentals is you want to track and measure those high level business KPIs. So things like your kind of gross profits, revenues per recruiter, thinking about candidate cost acquisitions. So thinking of those kind of high level business KPIs, and then there's a bunch of kind of sub KPIs that go and influence those. But keeping an eye and kind of measuring, seeing what those are, and seeing how those are trending, how those are moving, really give you a really good idea if you have those fundamentals in place or not, or areas that are kind of needed to be improved. And lastly, here around the data-driven decisions, having a single source of truth. And so if something happens, it's reflected inside the ATS CRM. That's kind of the utopia of how you can make data-driven decisions. If your data is in a bunch of different siloed places, it's really difficult to get it pulled all together and get it kind of nuanced and be able to do what you need to do with it. So kind of continue your aspiration to build that single source of truth would certainly be my recommendation. Improving data quality, I think, goes hand in hand, obviously, with being able to provide and do better data-driven decisions. If you have inaccurate or kind of old data, it's difficult to make quality decisions from that. Whereas if you're in a good spot with updating things, then you have a much better chance of making the right decisions. You want to ensure that you're tracking, measuring, reporting. So track the things that are important. If it's not measured, your team's not going to have an idea of how important it is or how much things are improving. And you want to ensure that you have a kind of a consistent reporting cadence so that the whole business is aware of kind of what's important, what needs to be improved, and then how those efforts are going. So with that, we can jump into some questions. If anybody has any, be happy to answer. It doesn't look like we have any submitted right now, but if anything comes up, feel free to let us know. Okay, we got a question here around reporting. Around does reporting need to be done via the kind of former Cube19, so what's currently Bullhorn Analytics? So the answer to that is certainly no. Obviously, that it makes it a lot easier, especially if you're trying to get that single source of truth. If you have everything within kind of the ecosystem, I've worked with a lot of clients that have their own business intelligence tools that are doing a bunch of different things on kind of that reporting concept. But a big kind of area of focus, I know on the product side, is to be able to get everything inside the ATS CRM, so that even if you're using Bullhorn Analytics, that's great. Then everything's there to report on. You can grab it and get those dashboards. But then even if you're using a third-party BI tool or something else, having it in one spot to then be able to integrate with fully can really help. Obviously, kind of make that happen. So I've seen people go about it in a variety of different ways, from a kind of reporting, analytics, actionable insights perspective. All right, next question is around kind of getting recruiters on board. Kind of being difficult initially. What's a good starter automation to help get their feet wet, get some buy-in? Yeah, so this is a great question and a great area of focus, and something I think is a near universal. When you're first rolling out automation, a lot of times, majority of recruiters are a little anxious about it, a little worried about it. There's a couple things that I can recommend. So number one, typically, like data hygiene type automations are things that recruiters get on board with really quickly, because it saves them from data entry, or just improves searching, improves kind of effectiveness. And it kind of eliminates the anxiety, because most of the anxiety comes from, I don't know if I want automation to be communicating with my candidates or clients, that kind of thing. So, starting with data hygiene can be a really good idea. Also, internal notifications is another good area to kind of think about. So, nothing outbound goes out. You're just inbound alerting when certain kind of key things are happening. So say, like a place candidate is close to coming off assignment, give that recruiter a heads up, to, number one, confirm that the end date's accurate, but then also, think about another position for that person. Things like that are typically well received. And then lastly, what I would say there is also there's ways that you can do kind of pilot programs where you can roll things out to kind of a small subset of recruiters that are interested and excited about automation. And then you kind of utilize, the benefits of that automation, and get everybody else, kind of curious, excited, and kind of spread that momentum throughout the organization. I've seen that also done really powerfully. Next question is around if people's email addresses or cell phones don't work. It's like, I guess, how to go about or combat that. So obviously that's a key problem. If you don't have updated contact information or a way to reach somebody, you get in trouble, because then obviously you can't, there's no way to contact or engage with them. So I really like to do a few things there. Is a lot of times you'll have one piece of information but not the other. So that's a really good automation to roll out. If you have an email address but not a phone, send an email to try to capture the phone. If you have a phone but not an email, vice versa. And then, obviously, doing some nurturing, some engagement, ensuring someone doesn't go a really long time without hearing from you, goes a long way to kind of keeping that information up to date and accurate. If you have contact information from 2 or 3 years ago, the chances of it being active are far less than if you just talked to that person, a month or two ago. So that's what I would recommend on that front. Next question is around if your team's on board with automations, but how to get everyone to kind of do the data entry like they're supposed to, keep the data clean, kind of change their behavior around that whole concept. So the answer there is, it's a process, and the ultimate success of it is going to be changing kind of the hearts and minds of your recruiters, which is a kind of a slow and steady thing. the biggest benefit and shift that I've seen, and this goes back even to my personal experience rolling out automation, is if you can convey what the better data quality will yield for results and how it will ultimately make their job easier, make them more money. So, things like if you enter in this information, then these things happen for you automatically. So things like that end up usually going a long way to getting your team kind of doing what they're supposed to be doing. Obviously, kind of tracking, reporting on it goes a really long way too. One of the metrics that we had back in my staffing days was kind of the data quality completeness of a candidate screening. So are we asking the right questions? Are we entering the data where we're supposed to? And then we actually kind of rolled that into our overall recruiter metrics that we looked at every month, kept a leaderboard on. So it's a really good way to spotlight that data quality piece, make it a focal point, and improve it over time. But obviously, like you got recruiters need to be shown the benefits and really believe it on their end. But you can clearly show it's making them more money and making their job easier, they're typically going to be really excited to do it. And this also goes hand in hand. If you can, eliminate a few things that they were doing previously that they no longer have to do, all of a sudden it frees up more time. Time is golden, especially when you're putting out a lot of fires. So you free up time, it allows for more kind of completeness on the data entry side of things. Another question around internal NPS through automation. Kind of what's the best way to go about that? So you can, we have clients kind of think about this in two different ways. Some clients will add their own internal employees as either a candidate or a contact, and then run it through automation, in that kind of way. Another way, and this is probably a bit of an easier way, especially if you don't want to kind of go through that effort of, making all your internal employees candidates or clients. You can just send a static survey link, from like a test record, for example. And then in that survey, if you want to capture who the person is taking it, you can just have questions for, their name. Or if you want to keep it completely anonymous, you could skip that step, but you could just send kind of a static survey URL link. And then your internal employees can take that survey and you can gather all that feedback. So those are the two ways that I've seen that done. Have worked really well. I think this is probably a part 2 around kind of where to start or kind of how to get recruiters on board, and kind of if I'd recommend starting with auto changing statuses. I think that can be a really good one. Oftentimes doing things either around status or ownership can be a really good place to start, in a way to kind of clean things up, both from kind of a data quality perspective, but then also getting everything ready and prepped, for some good marketing or some good re-engagement. And then last question here. Looks like there's one around kind of a continuation of a question from yesterday around kind of last note conversation around kind of tracking kind of activities or things of that nature. Yeah, so there's lots of triggers in the automation world to kind of look at activity. One that isn't is kind of like email replies or email activity that's in the email tab directly inside of Bullhorn. But like I've seen a lot of different workarounds where you can focus on things that are triggers. So whether that be notes, whether that be is if we're talking about candidates, are they getting submitted to a job? Are fields changing on the record? Things of that nature. So that's typically what happens as far as figuring out if engagement occurred. One thing I'll encourage you all to think about is with your note types, thinking about doing some categorization so that you can lump together certain note types to know if engagement occurred or not. So for example, if you just have phone call as a note type, I would recommend breaking that out into like inbound call, outbound call connect, outbound call message. Because then, for example, if I just leave a voicemail on somebody, obviously we didn't actually engage. If that person calls me, or if I call, they pick up, we answer, we have a conversation, that is actual engagement. So like it's an important concept to be able to separate out whether there's been kind of attempts or actual engagement. So that's just an example of something you could do there to kind of go in on that. But we are up on time here. We got through all those questions, which is great. And then just lastly, I'll just say if you want to find out more about automation best practices, you can find and follow me on LinkedIn. Every weekday, I will post something staffing automation related. And then I also have a staffing automation newsletter that does a little bit more of deep dive tutorials, trainings, etc. Those links are there. But thanks so much for attending. Hope you have a great Friday, rest of your weekend, and we'll be sharing the recordings as soon as they're available. So take care.